Welcome back to the podcast for the Adoption and Foster Care Clinic. If you're new with us, I'm joined here today by Kelly Curry and Caitlin Inman, both therapists here at our clinic. Today we're going to talk about reunion, which is a subject that can have a lot of mixed emotions around it, but it is when adoptees want to reach out possibly to their birth family and know who they are in some level of detail, right? And so I thought what we could do is just talk first through you guys' stories, and then maybe we can talk through also what some of our patients experience as well. So, yeah. Caitlin, you want to tell us your story?
Sure. And I'll start with a little background maybe just to give people an idea of the landscape of my adoption, so to speak. So I was domestically adopted around 6 to 8 weeks, I think. So I don't actually know the exact date of my placement, but I was definitely right around somewhere around, I don't know, 2-ish plus months old, still a baby, in foster care in an Amish foster home in the Blue Ridge Mountains of Virginia. And then my parents picked me up from there. I think it was about a year-long finalization process for them, and no openness. It was considered a closed adoption. And my mom said that she had an agreement to send updates to, I think it was a state worker that helped facilitate an adoption that started with the state and then moved to private. And so I think she was sending updates every few weeks, a couple of months or so to the state. But then when I reunited with my birth mom, she never got any of those updates. So there's some missing pieces and all of that and kind of how that all worked out. And so I grew up without any sort of connection or openness. I also have an adopted sister who's 4 years older. She also a closed adoption. We're not biologically related. We're only related through adoption or connected through adoption. And I didn't realize I was adopted until I was 7 or 8 years old. Had this moment where I found out, and it was a shocking experience. I think my parents got into the groove of parenting an adopted kid and just quit talking about it, which I think happens. And so from that point on, I had so many questions about my birth family. That kind of started my, kind of the wheel moving of what is my story? Who are these people? Do I have siblings? And it feels when I look back, a frequent thing that I thought about. So we would go to the beach and I would wonder if any of the people there were biological family members, or so there was kind of this current of constantly holding some sort of space for this other part of my life in my head. And it was not my curiosity about my birth family was not a welcomed curiosity. Not intentionally by my parents, but they just had their own grief and feelings wrapped up in what led them to become adoptive parents. There's some things that they had to grieve in that process. And then also I think me talking about my birth family just pushed on their pain. And so a lot of all these wonderings were very internal. But it stuck with me for a long time. And if I asked questions about it, usually I got very different stories. So it was so hard to piece together. Sometimes I would hear that my birth mother was young, or sometimes she was she was 16, and then sometimes she was 19. And it was I could never quite make sense of the story. And it could be that I was mixing my sister's story too, but it just was always this unknown, undefined, curious thing that I kind of carried with me. And so it wasn't until I was 29 that at some point, it's just so hard to put all the steps together in a way that makes sense. So at some point, my older adopted sister handed me my adoption file. So she was a little bit of a detective, so to speak, and would just find things whenever she wanted. And my parents had this metal safe in their closet, and she hijacked it and handed me my adoption paperwork. And so I was around 18, 19. And so that was the first time I ever had anything substantial in my hands. with information. And I remember looking at it, there was like hospital records, there was all sorts of stuff, and I had no idea what to do with it, but I just like held on to it, and it like got stored away. And then I started working in adoption, like just kind of got placed at an adoption agency along my career development and started working with these types of documents. And I started understanding what the information was. So fast forward, and I'm in my mid to late 20s, and I'm like looking at this paperwork again with the eyes of somebody who understands what it means to fill these things out, and I know what information to look for. And in all of my documents, except for one, my birth mother's name is scratched out. So there's one spot where somebody missed it, and her name is right there. And then in another spot, her emergency contact is listed, and it's like a very unique, it's not a common name. And so I started doing Facebook searches for trying to find anybody connected to these people. I reached out to like a private detective who was helping me through Facebook, just somebody who's personally connected to adoption, who loves to help adoptees find their biological family. And eventually I found, based on the emergency contact that was on my adoption paperwork, I found a local business in the city I was born, owned by somebody who had the same last name. So I reached out to that person by phone, and he followed up and said, I was basically just like, I'm an adoptee. I'm trying to find my biological family members. Do you know somebody by this name, by the name of my birth mother listed on my paperwork? And he was like, oh yeah, I know her. He's like, I'd known her a long time. She's married now. She has other kids. I think he was like, she has a bunch of kids. And I do remember something about her placing a child for adoption. And so he gave me her current name because what was on paperwork was a former name. And so that increased my Facebook searching, and I could not find her, but I found her kids and her husband. And I just started sending Facebook messages, like kind of like direct, but also very easy. Like, I think I could be, do you know this person? I think I could be related. I would just like to talk to them and get some information. If you could help me, let me know. And her husband reached out to me and said, yes, I know her. I'm married to her. We have other children. And I was like, okay, I think she could be my biological mom. And he was like, it's possible. Like, when was your birth date? And I gave it, and he was like, yes, she placed a child for adoption on this day. She has been wondering if you would ever find us. And so that was like such a shock, it was like so much at once. And another part of the story for me is I was about 6 months postpartum with my second baby, who had horrible colic. And I experienced for the first time like postpartum anxiety and depression. So emotionally, I was already like a little unstable. So I remember like either being robotic or being a mess. Like there was no in between. I was either full on and just like, oh my God, what's happening? Or like I could not even feel anything. A couple days later, though, I talked to my birth mother on the phone for the first time, and that was amazing. All of her kids knew about me. She shared her story with me. They celebrated my birthday every year as a family growing up. Her kids had tried to find me, but they didn't have all the information. So my parents had moved several times, and they didn't have my current name to even try to find me. So that was all really incredible. And then I think a few months later, like September or October, we drove to meet them, and I met them in person for the first time. And then the side story to all of that was like crazy, was that the emergency contact listed on my birth mother's hospital paperwork ended up being my biological father. So after I reached out to my biological mother, he kind of stayed in contact with me and was like, I think there's a chance, like we were involved relationally, and I think there's a chance that like I could be your biological father. And so I got a spit DNA test in the mail, and like sent it off, and like sure enough, like 99.9% DNA match. And so he traveled to visit us probably a couple months after that. So like within, it was like July, it was right before my birthday. So July, I found them. By October of that same year, I had met both sides. And so it felt fast and really wonderful, but it was also a lot at the same time. Yeah, and we've had a few meetups since then. My biological mother came here with her husband and spent like a long weekend with us once, which was great. I have not seen my biological father again, which is like more on me than it is on him. I think he would be way more connected and involved. Navigating all of that was surprisingly confusing for me. I think that's one of the things that has been hard about all of it is there's no preparation for how you function in these relationships. And it's such an awkward, it can feel awkward to have people in your life who are significant and carry great importance, but you have no relationship with. And so, like, holding that, both of those things, it's just such a weird tension. And also the stage of life I'm in, like being a mom, parenting young children, trying to navigate these like emotionally heavy, but also not heavy, but just these like, again, this like weird balance of like important but strangers. Like navigating all of that with the stage of life I'm in has been really hard. And it's just, I don't know, I think there were things that I grieved that I didn't expect to grieve. So like all of the siblings that most of them, there's like, they have their own struggles and things that they deal with, but most of the siblings are all very close. So like my first time around them, they're like finishing each other's sentences. And, you know, like that is just in some way like amazing to see, but also like sad to not be a part of. And then at the other thing, like on the other side of all of that, it gave the life that I do have like so much more, I had so much more appreciation. Just, I think it was the ability to put my story together and to be like, oh, I can now connect how I landed where I landed. And even though I wish there was a way to combine both worlds, I'm thankful for where I am. And that was the first time in my life that I was able to say, like, I'm grateful that this event happened in my life. Like, I wouldn't be, like, to say that with full truth, you know, like in full acceptance. Like, I wish that I could have grown up knowing these people, but I am grateful for the life that I have, even though that meant I didn't have those relationships growing up, you know, like, and so that was incredibly healing for me. And it took several months to get to that place of just like, again, the shock of it all, settling, and then even like furthered experiences of like getting to know people and just coming to understand the whole thing. But that was like an unexpected benefit.
And what would you say was your primary thought before then? If this was gratefulness that this had happened, what was keeping you from gratefulness that this had happened before?
I think just not knowing, and also for me, I felt very different. And I think I don't know how to put words around it. Like, I don't know. I try to understand it now from like the lens of a therapist. Like, how would I identify what I felt as a kid? I don't know if that was attachment wounds, but like it just always felt like there was this piece that kept me separate. And I think that if my parents could comfortably identify, I think they would probably say that they feel that's like this void of connection that has been very difficult to name, but always present. And I think that that's attachment trauma. Like, I think that is the ongoing implication of attachment trauma, you know, when that happens. And so I grew up very aware of that feeling, this like unnameable void that felt like painful and unidentifiable and just present. And this allowed me to put shape around that some. So like that's kind of before I just felt, I don't even know how you describe that. It's just, there was just this thing, and it's still there a little bit. Like, it didn't just go away now that I've connected with them, but it helped me like accept that more, or I don't know, like it's just so
Some
weird.
healing.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. A portion. 'Cause I don't think like, if I believe what I believe about primal wounds, you know, these events that happen at very vulnerable stages of development, very early on in our lives, if I believe what I believe about them, that they impact an inner sense of self, I don't know that ever totally goes away, like that we just ever completely erase the impact of adoption. I think we can learn to understand it differently, and I think we can learn to accept and act in opposition. Like we can identify what's happening to us and choose something healthier and different. But I don't know that it ever goes away. For those of us that really feel it, I don't know.
How did that change then your relationship to your adoptive parents? Because I know as an adoptive parent, that's what often we're worried about, the search and reunion.
So search and reunion made my parents feel very vulnerable. And so I think they really feared, again, because I think they have always sensed this, like, again, this void, like for lack of a better word. And so I think their fear was these people are going to come into our lives and she's going to develop a closer relationship with them than we've been able to achieve. Okay. And so it felt very threatening. And it impacted their ability, although they have really tried, they've really tried. It's just so hard for them. But it impacted their ability to really join me in search and reunion, and also for me to feel like being able to bring an unbiased party into that process that's just there to support you. They were not the ones I would have chosen to do that with because of how hard it was for them, But when my birth mother came in town, my parents showed up. My mom brought baby photos and albums, and that was really hard for her, But she showed up and she came, and it was on her birthday too. It just so happened that they came in town on my mom's birthday, and so she showed up, she was there, and I knew that was a huge emotional, hard ask for her to do, And I was so appreciative of that. But at the same time, that whole experience was so hard for them. Even my dad, I remember him saying in tears, I hope that this person that you meet, this biological dad that you meet can be everything you want him to be. And I was like, I don't want him to be anything. I remember saying I'm not looking to replace you. This is not about me needing more significant relationships. This is about me needing to know my story. And I have no idea what the future holds, but these people will never replace who you are to me and who you are to my children, you will always be significant and important and hold a role that nobody else can step into. So that was just really hard. Mm-hmm. And we don't talk about it a ton. Every now and then my mom will ask me, have you heard from your biological mom? And I think she wants to, again, I think it's out of a desire to try to stay in it with me, but it's not a comfortable thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Gosh, thanks for sharing your story. Yeah. That's so much. I didn't know that, you had that moment around 6 or 7 where you're like, oh, I was adopted.
Uh-huh. Yeah. Yes. Yep. We had, so my sister who's 4 years older, there's lots of reasons I think this is the case, but without digging too much into that, she always grew up with the knowledge that we were both adopted, and I did not. And I think attachment with her was a little more difficult just due to some conditions connected to her adoption process. And I think attachment for my parents to me was much easier. And so I think for them it felt unnatural to talk about adoption with me. I think the attachment just kicked in so much faster. And so I think as time went on, conversations about it just slowly phased out. And as I developed and appeared to be a typical kid, it probably felt to them like this isn't necessary for us to keep talking about. But my sister never forgot, and she held on to it, and she had shared the information that we were both adopted with a friend that fell in between both of our ages. So, and I was probably closer to 8 when it happened, and she was at our house one day, we were all playing, and we were in my room doing something, and she was like, "You're adopted." I was like, "No, I'm not." And she was like, "Yeah, you are." And I was like, "What?" And so I ran into the kitchen and had this my mom was cooking dinner, had this dramatic moment of "Mom, Hannah said that I was adopted." And she was like, "You are adopted." And I was like, "What?" And I lost it, And so it was a total shock, which I don't think my mom ever intended for it to happen that way. But it was. And then I became I remember writing about it at school. We had an assignment, and that was the thing that I wrote about that day for our daily journal or something. And then from then on, it was just a huge part of who am I, what's my story, who are these people? Because I think even though I appeared to be a typically developing kid, I think that little void I talked about, I think I even felt it. I think that I was cognizant of something feeling different, even as a young child. And when I heard about adoption, it was like sink, and I could not let it go. You know, it was like that. It's all of a sudden something is shining a light on this thing that I feel and kind of giving it some meaning. And like, now I need to know more.
Right. Yeah. Another question I had too was when you're reaching out to people that weren't your birth mother, but people related.
Yeah.
Were you afraid that, oh, you know, they didn't know and I was going to dig something up that they didn't even know about? Like you got lucky that they all knew about you. Like, what was that feeling like?
And so I did not mention adoption at all until I had like some confirmation that they knew her. And I think even then I said, I think we could be related. So I tried to be like really generic as possible. But I also think I just got to the point in my adult life where I was like, I may really mess things up for her, but like, I think I just need to try to find her. And so that was a risk that I was willing to take because it was like, I already don't have a relationship with her. So if I just make her angry at me, I have lost nothing. You know, like I'm not losing anything that I don't already not have, you know? So.
And I think that's a big thing for adoptees is what are they going to find on the other side? You know, I mean, what are they going to find? Are they going to get this welcome? Are they going to get rejection that they already feel or that, oh, it confirms the rejection? I think that's a hard, when you're trying to make that decision about whether to search for your birth parents, that's always in your mind.
Yeah. It is. I think stage of life was helpful for me too. Like, you know, I was married, I just had my second child, like I had a career that I was in, like I had achieved a lot of things that gave me stability and meaning and purpose. And so it made the outcomes on the other end feel okay. You know, like if she rejected me, for me in this circumstance, I would have been okay because I had all these things. It would have been sad and I would have needed space to like grieve that and come to terms with it. But at my age, and just where I was maturity-wise, I could have weathered that without it being totally shattering. I think and again, this is different for adoptees, where they're at in their story, their development, you know, their identity as an adoptee. I think had I found them when I was like 18, with how impulsive and just like chaotic I existed at that time, I would have done something like moved to where they are, you know, like I would have like uprooted my life and tried to like integrate myself into their family. Because at that point in time, as like a young adult, so much of my identity and my adoption, it was just all so confusing. And, you know, like I would have chased it, I think. So.
Yeah. And I think it's significant too that you were doing this on your own. You know, you didn't really have support.
Yes.
Doesn't sound like.
Yeah, no. And my husband obviously was like, whatever you want to do, like if you want to do it, we're going to do this. So like he was absolutely walking alongside of me through it. But I think it's different, again, like that non-biased piece. You know what I mean? Like, even his support was like, because we shared other roles. I don't know. It's hard to say. I did like at the advice of Kelly. So Kelly and I were working together at another place at the time. So she like got to watch all of this go down for me. She connected me with a therapist and was like, you probably need somebody to talk to. And so I did. And that was great. And that was really helpful, like having somebody on the outside. But even then, like I didn't know what support I needed and like how to like bring people alongside of me. I think it's so important for adoptive parents to help prepare their adopted children for the outcomes of reunion and like having those conversations regularly. Just because I tanked emotionally. Like there was like a good 6 months time. I got a dumb tattoo. Like I went off the deep end for a minute, you know, like, and it wasn't great because again, 6-month-old colicky baby, you're already like really fragile when you're in that stage of parenting. And then this happened and it was like, whew, I didn't see any of it coming, like how it was going to affect me emotionally. So I think being able to like support and prepare your kid for that along different stages of their life is helpful and important. Tattoo's been covered up. since then.
I know, like, I want to see the tattoo.
It's a terrible story. I will give you the very brief story. My friend reached out because she had 2 tickets to see Beyonce in New Orleans.
Oh, no.
That's how it starts, okay? I was like, yeah, why not? Because, yeah, anyway. And so we went to New Orleans and decided, like, let's get tattoos. And this is one of my friends who we met, like, early in college and was just like she lived with my family, like, just like a sister, kind of. And we met in Professor Machin's class, who was not even a great professor. I don't think he's, R.I.P. most likely. He was old as dirt then. So this was this was several years ago. Okay, it was like early college. So like at least I can't even do the math. 20 years ago, basically. And so he would like be professing, teaching us, and like lean back and close his eyes and pause for several minutes. And it was like, is he asleep? Did he just have a stroke? Like, what is happening? And then he would just like come to and continue his sentence wherever he left off. It was so bizarre. But that's where we met. And so we decided we would get a matchstick tattoo for this, anything that we could have chosen. Like, as friends, there's so many things we could have chosen. But we chose this very strange educational experience too. It was a big matchstick. Yeah.
Like to size.
Right. And then we had talked about like, oh, we'll just get on the inside of our finger. And of course the tattoo people, which you run into them, can be either really gracious and kind or like really terrible. This was the terrible kind. And they're like, we're not doing tattoos that small. It needs to be at least this size. And we were like, okay, never mind. And we walked out. Okay. We had a moment of sense. We walked out of the tattoo shop and we got down like to the corner of the street. We were like, no, let's do it. And so we turned back around and the tattoo guys were like, wait, so you want the tattoo now? Like, they were so done with us. And we were like, yeah, we want it. And so then I'm still like riding high on like a general adrenaline and impulsivity, which again, like, so anyway.
So I think we can clearly say there are some negative outcomes to search and reunion. So one of those possible negative outcomes is bad tattoos.
Right. Yes. Absolutely. Yeah.
Since covered though. All good.
Since covered. Yeah.
Good
Buy
and
an adoption themed tattoo.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
There you go.
Wow. Well, it's hard to transition from that to Kelly, but here, let's start again. Tell us a little of your story, Kelly.
So I was adopted at about 3 months old, a little over 3 months old, from South Korea. I was the only child until my parents later got divorced. But was an only child. My parents' initial desire to grow their family through adoption was, I guess, ignited by infertility. And so there was some infertility trauma there for them. And then came home and a very kind of white, black community is kind of where I grew up. And I will say that, from a very early age, and it was kind of harder to hide, obviously, transracial adoption. My parents are very white. But from a very early age, they kind of always told me about my story. So I remember I was probably 3 or 4, sitting down at the table with my mom and her pulling out all the things that she had from Korea. So all of my adoption paperwork, there was I came home with a Korean flag and a little pacifier. And so, her just kind of walking through it as much as she could at that age. And of course I was more fixated on the pacifier and stuff. And so, always knew I was adopted. As kind of we got into life, they didn't talk about it as much. But again, I was constantly reminded because of being Asian in a very white, black community. So as I grew older, because I think they were so open about adoption, they told me all they knew about my story based on my paperwork. Adoption kind of was always there, but that aspect kind of faded to the back. And being Asian was really difficult for me. Being Asian, not any other Asian people. I tell people the census data from where I grew up was 0.002% Asian, I was it in my community for a really long time. So that was the most glaring, difficult aspect of transracial adoption for me, is just being Asian and in a not very Asian diverse community. So that was difficult, and just kind of trucked along. I was one of those adoptees who felt pretty confident in my adoption story, didn't have a ton of questions about my birth family. And I will say that my mom always said, like, hey, if you ever want to go search, like, we're there, like, we'll search with you. And, you know, just kind of, again, that piece for me was overshadowed by like just racism I felt and some bullying that I endured. So that didn't become super prominent until later. But kind of went on, you know, graduated high school, found more diversity in college. So that was really good. And just kind of like worked out my story, kind of like Caitlin. I knew from a very early age that I felt called to be a child and family therapist. And so like I was pursuing that route. And in my college experience, I was placed in an adoption agency. And so never really thought about kind of combining the two until that moment. So had a really great experience there, kind of worked out a little bit of my story, but it was much more like kind of like what Caitlin said, like seeing paperwork and then realizing, oh, my family went through this too. You know, nothing really that stands out through that period of my life. Started working at the original UAB International Adoption Clinic. And I remember like as we were getting ready to like do some travel and some work in orphanages, I started thinking more about just wanting more information, seeing if there was any more information in my file. And again, I knew the process better at this point. So I ended up searching for my stateside agency and found out that that agency had closed, potentially due to corruption. And so there was really nowhere for me to like reach out and contact stateside. So I went and I filled out a form for my Korean-based agency. Filled out a form that is made for adoptees who want to connect, and emailed it, never heard back. And it wasn't like this big pressing need of mine, so I just kind of let it go. Like life, you know, happened, things moved on. I just kind of continued about my life. Then COVID hit in 2020. I had one child at the time, and I remember Caitlin and I were friends then. And I had just found out that I was pregnant with my second. Again, this was 2020, September-ish, August, September-ish. And then in September, I had a pretty significant birthday. And then I just started thinking again, like many adoptees do, around like significant events about my story and about my birth family. So I filled out that form again. I reached out to my Korean-based agency, filled out the form, and this time I got a pretty immediate response. And so I sent them, you know, all the documentation I needed to potentially like have my file opened on their side and send me all the information, plus potentially look for my birth family. And I will say, to back up, what I had been told, what was in my original Korean paperwork and I had a lot of information. I've seen a lot of Korean files now, and so I know that I had a lot of information, even for a Korean referral. So I knew my birth parents' ages were on there, their names were on there. It said that they had no children, that my mom cleaned houses as an occupation. My dad was a taxi driver. It said in there that they were not married, but were in a relationship. She got pregnant. She no longer had contact with my birth father, and so he was unaware of the pregnancy. And so that was the basic information in my file. So I wasn't expecting much more than that because I had, you know, again, names. You generally don't have names of, you know, your birth parents. But I also requested for them to send me any other information that was in my Korean-based file. So again, they wrote back pretty quickly. I filled out some paperwork, told them I wanted them to like reach out and see if they could find my birth family. This was at the very end of September, and I believe it was like October 13th, I got an email that said they had found my birth family. They had made contact specifically with my dad, and that they wanted direct contact, that they had been looking for me. So I just remember I remember where I was. I was sitting on my bed and just was you know, checking email, scrolling through email during COVID, and I opened it up and it was like it's probably one of the most prominent times in my life where I can definitively say I was in shock. It was just, I was not expecting, of all, for them to necessarily find anything. I mean, intercountry adoption, like that wasn't, being able to reconnect in an intercountry adoption when I was adopted wasn't really a thing. So I wasn't expecting much. And just the fact that it happened so quickly. And my husband walked in, like, as I was reading the email, and he could see it on my face. And he was like, "What is going on?" And I was like, "They found my birth family. They've made contact with them." And he was like, of course, for him, it was like all excitement. Like, "Oh my gosh, like, that is incredible. How are you feeling? Like, that's so exciting." And I wasn't there. Like, I was just like, probably a mixture of about a million different emotions at one time. It was like shock. There was like some excitement there, but that was like really, really stunted by feelings of like overwhelm. Like it was incredibly overwhelming. Like almost like now the cat's out of the bag. Like there's no shoving the cat back in the bag. Like they know I'm out here. They know I exist. Like I've got to walk through this door now. And so I wrote back, and then I requested a DNA test. And so plucked a couple of my hairs out and sent them to Korea, and got those results back that it was a match. And so, before all that, I did just write an initial letter, through the agency. We went through the agency for a little while until DNA was confirmed, but, it was just a little bit about me, what I do, my kids. And I remember in writing that letter, I was so nervous about it, but I wanted to make sure that they knew that I didn't have like any negative feelings towards them for creating an adoption plan. So I made sure that was really apparent. I made sure that they knew that I wasn't expecting anything, by doing this. And then very quickly they wrote back, and we just exchanged letters like via email, pictures via email for a little while. Then, like I said, DNA was confirmed. And then I requested that I have direct contact with them. So I had to sign like consents, because the agency was very much so, okay, if you're requesting direct contact, we're stepping out of this process. It's up to you now at this time. And so we got direct contact, and we started emailing directly back and forth, and then through an app back and forth. And then they were very much so like wanting me to make a visit. And so again, it was COVID, so we were delayed for a little while, but then I scheduled a trip to Korea. And I just remember this is when I work with adoptees who are doing search and reunions now, and they found somebody and they're going to make a visit, or, they're going for that initial meeting, I tell them, be absolutely 100% selfish, because as an adoptee, so many decisions have been made for us. We were powerless in this whole adoption situation. And so in search and reunion, we as adoptees have a little bit of power. And so where you can, be selfish, like communicate what you want, And so I did that. I told my husband he was not going. I needed him. And by now we were planning a trip. And so my daughter, my youngest daughter, was just over a year old. And so I knew that if I'm going to Korea and going to be there for a little while, I wanted him at home, so I could just feel the freedom to know that they were good. They were in good hands. I could take a little bit of worry off of that. And I knew I wanted somebody to go that had that could be a support, but had kind of walked through it. So Caitlin, we traipsed over to Korea together. And through all this, after I found them, I didn't tell my mom that I was searching for them. But after I found them, I told her. And my mom, again, she is always, and I say my mom because my dad passed away in 2009. So I was talking to my mom about it, and I can remember even throughout childhood, even though she was so open about my story, I still felt the need to protect her a little bit. I didn't want to hurt her feelings, or I didn't want to make her feel less than, and I think I was picking that up from somewhere, and so I was still a little nervous whenever I told her. But I told her, I remember exactly where I was when I told her, and her response was, oh my gosh, like, how do you feel? And I was like, I mean, like, I feel good. I feel excited. Like, I'm planning and I want to go visit. And she was like, of course you want to go visit. That's your mom and dad. So like her saying that was just so powerful, like just so powerful, her acknowledging, like without hesitation and without like negative emotion, or at least she hit it well, like without a whole lot of negative emotion behind it, like just like very casually, of course you want to see them. Yeah. Of course you wanted to find them. They're your mom and dad. So that was really powerful. But I knew, like, and I joked with her, because I don't even think my mom's ever been on an airplane. And so I joked with her. I was like, you going to go to Korea with me? And she was like, I mean, yeah, if you want me to, like, I guess I can. But took Caitlin, and it was such a great experience. So we traipsed over. How long were we there? Like 9? And so, like, I remember, like, talking to her on the plane and thinking, like, I think that I'm out of the fog. Like, I think that I've processed my adoption well. Like, I feel like I'm in a good place. I said, but part of me feels like I'm going to do this and, like, the tower is going to come crumbling down. Like, I'm afraid that I'm missing something. And so I did have that fear walking into it. I really like that. So the front end of our trip was all about experiencing Korea, like just like doing touristy things. We went at the absolute best time because it had just opened back up. And so like it wasn't super crowded, but everything was pretty much open. So for a few days, we just like did sightseeing. We walked a ton. We just experienced Korea, which was like a really, impactful experience for me, because like there's just so many little things that are so Korean that I still have here that was just like, I don't know, like ingrained in me. So it was really fun to kind of see those, the correlation between some of those things. And then I hired a translator, a really great translator, who had worked with a big Korean organization. She's Korean, but worked with a big Korean organization in Korea. So she had done a lot of reunions. And I was able to tell her at the very beginning, like, I am so ignorant on so many, like, cultural norms. So please, if I say something dumb, say it to them like I did not. And she was like amazing. So I hired her. And I remember, like, of course, gifts are a big thing. So I had all these gifts that we took over, a big suitcase, because we had to get on public transportation and take it to where my parents lived. But we took a big suitcase over, and I remember, like, being so nervous on that ride over to meet them for the first time. And to go back, I forgot to mention that, in just correspondences back and forth with my birth family, I learned that my birth mother and birth father were actually married at the time. And I had 3 full biological sisters. Wow. So I was the youngest by 5 years, the youngest of 4 girls. The middle sister that they parented had passed away in, I think 2012 from a car accident. But all very close family, still intact. That was shocking to me, because I had figured that I probably had at least half siblings at this time. I had zero indication or thought that I had full siblings. What's interesting is another thing that like prompted me to search in general was I was following another Korean adoptee's story, like over COVID, and hers was very similar. Like she thought the same. She ended up having 3 full siblings, and so I was like, oh wow, that's really cool. Never thought that would happen for me, but here we are. And so again, like went to meet with my birth family. And that was, again, a very overwhelming experience, and I had worked search and reunions for other adoptees for several years at this time, but feeling it is different, like walking up the stairs, seeing my birth family for the first time. And so that we visited with them twice while we were in Korea, and it was pretty much all day both times. So the first day, I went to my parents' house, and 2 of my nieces and 2 of my nephews were there. My oldest sister was there. My the youngest sister that they parented, she had like COVID at the time. And then my mom and dad were there, and then Caitlin and my translator. And so in real Kelly fashion, they had this huge spread of food. And like every time you would finish one thing, they would bring more food and more food and more food. And they were just, I was overwhelmed, but they were just so gracious. Like they sat down and they just wanted to answer any question that I had. And I wasn't prepared with a whole lot of questions. Like again, I felt pretty like solid in my adoption story. And so it's not like I had a lot of burning questions that I needed to know. So I had to come up with some things like in the moment to like ask them. And so I found out like some really impactful stuff though. So I found out that I was named. I did have that question. I was named by my birth family. And me and my sisters all have like similar names. And then, correct me if I'm wrong, because the good thing is she's like my historian because I was overwhelmed, so she can help with some of this. But I asked about just like my birth mom placing me for adoption. And she said, which this was in my records too, that my birth father had a really bad accident. He did drive taxis, and he had a really bad car accident. And right around that time, she found out I was pregnant. She found out she was pregnant with me. And she was able to show, this is like treasure to me, she was able to give me a photo of herself when she was pregnant with me. So that was really cool to have. And, she said that like basically they were tormented by placing me for adoption. So I think that was kind of the plan. She had talked to her OB about it. And like right after she had me, she had told them she wanted to place me, but they left their equivalent of their social security numbers. And so that's how they were able to find them so quickly. They wanted to be found if I ever wanted to. But she said that, for a while after she left the hospital, she had dreams about me. She said she had one dream where, she was trying to walk across the ocean or something like that. And I think she ended up sending someone back, maybe my birth father, a few days later to get me because she was like, I can't do this. And I was already gone. Probably with a foster family at that point. So she got to tell me more of my story in relation to that. It was also really impactful that I wasn't a secret. So while we were there, I can't remember, it was my first or second visit with them, but I got to meet aunts and uncles. They found out I was there, and one of my aunts was in the hospital for cancer treatment. She checked herself out and came over, drove 2 hours to come and see me. So that was really cool. At one point, they took us to this market area, and my birth mom and my sister were parading me around and introducing me to everybody. This is my daughter. This is my daughter. I also got to meet my oldest sister's husband, who is precious. He was just so kind, and he was so excited. So it was really neat to see just how much I was celebrated. I wasn't a secret. I was celebrated. Still completely overwhelming, but as far as search and reunions go, it was a really incredible experience, So, and what's so interesting is we've done a couple of video calls. My oldest daughter feels really connected to them, so she lights up and wants to meet them. We'll have to go back to Korea one day, but again, just overall overwhelming, but a really positive experience. I remember, just processing things afterwards. And I think I actually said this to Caitlin, there was a little bit of guilt, honestly, about how my experience went, because I work with so many adoptees who, they need this. They need to have, an experience similar to what I had. And I didn't need it. That's not something I needed. And so, I describe it as not something I needed, but it's one of the greatest bonuses of my life that I was able to experience that. But yeah, so it's hard staying connected to them because of the language barrier. My parents also struggle with some health issues. They both are battling or have battled cancer. And so I generally communicate through one of my nieces she's in her early 20s. And so I write to her. She gets to my parents. They write back. We have to get it translated. So, that part is really difficult about staying in contact. But I hope to go back at some point, and take the family. My husband really wants to go. He feels like shafted and left out that I left him. But I tell him all the time, like, I'm so glad I did. Like, it was just such a, like, good, I'm not going to say healing trip, but, like, it provided, like, it provided a lot of comfort, like just being able to experience Korea and meet them and be in their presence. One of Caitlin actually, again, bonus of taking someone who's done this, like she was just in charge of like taking pictures. And she took this one picture, like I'm sitting on the floor of my parents' living room and like looking up at the wall. And there's like pictures of me and my family, like just up on their wall, and so that's really sweet. So yeah, just overall like a really positive experience.
And how did it change then your relationship with your adoptive? I know your mother was still living.
Yeah.
Tell me that.
Like honestly, because my parents in general did a lot of things right, but they did a lot of things I wish they would have done differently and that they would have changed. But in regards to like my adoption story and being open about my adoption, they did really, really well. But having her respond like that it made me feel so much more like appreciative of her and her ability to like, do that, like to be present and to like respond in such like a supportive like way, even if she had to dig deep for it, because I'm sure there's still a lot of feelings about it. And honestly, like, and I tell adoptive families all the time, and I felt this too, that if you do it well and you do it with your kid, it's going to bring you closer. It's not going to separate you more. Like you being able to walk well through that with your kid is connecting. It's not separating, and so I felt that. I felt that in my experience too.
Did you have any similar experiences to like Caitlin mentioned of how did it change your view of being adopted? Is it like what she said, it made her more like she could truly say she was at peace and grateful for it? How about you?
So, I mentioned that on the way there, I was like, man, is this going to blow up my life? Like, do I think that I'm like, I will say that, honestly, I do feel like I processed a lot of my adoption prior to, and there's nothing besides like me being super grateful. Like again, like I truly feel like this was probably one of just the biggest bonuses of my life. I didn't need it. It didn't change like how I view my adoption or how I view myself as an adoptee. But it was just like a huge bonus for me to be able to experience it. Yeah.
One thing we talked about, I don't know when we were talking about this, probably just between patients, but we were talking about how it does change a little bit about like those big events in your life, those big dates of the year, like your birthday, your adoption day, Mother's Day. Those are days when as an adoptee you think about, you wonder as you're growing up. And so how did it change how you process those days?
Yeah. I think that for me, by being with them, I learned of like significant Korean holidays in a big way that they celebrate. So I will think of them like during those days more. Honestly, we mentioned this before, but some significant dates of the year have always been hard, and I think those still remain hard. One of those is like Mother's Day. Mother's Day tends to be difficult. My birthday tends to be difficult, and those are all still difficult. But I think that there's just like added relief, I guess, just like knowing more, like knowing the people, the faces that were a part of my story, I don't know what you...
Yeah, I would describe it similarly, like those days are still carry some emotional weight for me, but it's shifted now. It feels differently because now instead of wondering, I like have the information that's there, but there's still some of the feelings around all of it that show up.
I think that just goes to like show like regardless, like adoption is not a one and done thing, you know, like adoption trauma sticks with us regardless of like how well you were parented or how well your search and reunion goes. Like a search and reunion is not necessarily going to heal you from the adoption trauma that you experienced, you know. And I know like and I know Caitlin feels this way too, like every adoptee's story is different. So I don't want to speak for any other adoptee but myself, you know. But I think that if the expectation was that a search and reunion was going to completely like heal me from the abandonment and trauma that I experienced as an adoptee, I think that an adoptive family that they're going to be disappointed, you know, because it's always there. It's always there.
I mean, I mean, I know y'all do a lot of good work with helping with search and reunion. Like, just hearing your stories reaffirms to me that's a good thing, that the work that you're doing and necessary work that you're doing to take a young adoptee or an adult adoptee and walk with them through this process so that their expectations are managed or appropriately set and managed.
Yeah. I love working with adoptees and adoptive families, honestly, who are working through this process. Honestly, I really like supporting adoptive parents a lot, you know, so that they can like be present and support adoptees well, you know.
Right.
It's some of my favorite work to do.
Or even just making that decision. Should you search?
Right.
You know, that's the first decision you've got to make. And not everybody chooses to do it. Well, I was hoping to unpack some of this and to talk more generally about, you know, search and reunion in general. But man, I just enjoyed listening to y'all's stories. I was just enthralled because, I mean, I kind of knew some of y'all's stories, but I just didn't know the details, and we hadn't just had the time to sit and just say it. So it'll be fun to unpack this a little bit more and at least a part 2.
Many more.
Probably many more, definitely. So thank y'all. Thank you so much for being open and vulnerable and sharing your stories with us.